I kind of already talked about the budget in a live stream I did on Wednesday, I think it was. So I don't really have much more to say there. But if there's specific things about the budget that people want to discuss, then I'm open to discussing that. So I thought maybe we could jump into Keystone XL pipeline and talk about some of the things that that happened with that. So um, this past week, I got a heads up on some information that was in the TC Energy's annual report for 2020 regarding the pipeline and the Alberta government's involvement in the pipeline. And so I decided to go through it and try and really understand what I was saying, because there's a lot of technical information regarding investments and finance and that sort of thing. So it took me a little bit of research to really wrap my mind about what sort of happened with the pipeline investment. And so I decided to write the article. So it's the third story down in the chat. But basically, it's, from the sounds of it, it's not clear from the document who approached whom, but it seems to me that the Alberta government approached TC Energy about investing in the pipeline. My understanding, and this isn't available in the annual report, but my understanding is that TC Energy wasn't planning on building it, at least not immediately. And then the Alberta government showed up and that changed their plans. And so basically the Alberta government came in and had told TC Energy that, we'll invest up to $1.1 billion. That's US money. So I think it was about 1.5 billion Canadian dollars. And what that money was used for was to purchase equity in the pipeline. Technically, it was equity that was in certain Keystone XL subsidiaries of TC Energy. So it seems to me that there's a child company under TC Energy that was responsible for Keystone XL. So it's, or maybe multiple ones, because it says certain Keystone XL subsidiaries. So it's plural. So it sounds like there's more than one. And so basically we bought shares into that company or companies that were in charge of the pipeline. So we had promised up to 1.1 billion, and by the end of 2020, according to this annual report, we had invested 1.033 billion. So almost all of it in Class A interests. And Class A interests are basically shares that provide enhanced benefits to the holders, such as you get priority when they pay out dividends. You get preferences if the company is sold. So if they sell the company and you own shares, then you get preference for being paid, being among the first who get paid, because they will pay off creditors and stuff like that. And then you'll get paid before some of the people who have lower class shares than you, as well as increased voting rights. However, it sounds like these Class A shares were non-controlling interests. So even though we had certain voting rights, they didn't allow us to make any major changes to the way that the company operated. Non-controlling interest is also another way of saying minority interest. So we didn't have the ability to overrule anybody or outvote anybody based on the amount of shares that we had. Now, as part of the investment, TC Energy received what's called a call right to the shares, and the Alberta received a put right to the shares. And what that means that TC Energy could buy the shares back at a specific price by a certain date, and vice versa. The government could sell shares at a specific price by a certain date if specific conditions were met. Alberta's shares were entitled to a return, and that return accrued quarterly. So every quarter, they would get an updated return. And that would also adjust the carrying value, or the cost of investment minus any accumulated depreciation. So it's really, really technical. And so I'm trying to do my best to explain things in a way that's easier for people to understand. So anyhow, by the end of the year, TC Energy had reclassified 630 million of Alberta's shares as liabilities because they had planned in January, this past January, of exercising that call right. Their contract with the government indicated that they could buy these shares back in January 2021. And so they were anticipating doing that. And as a result, they reclassified those as liabilities in their 2020 report. So in addition to the equity purchase, the Alberta government had promised $4.2 billion worth of loan guarantees. And that means that TC Energy could borrow up to that amount and the government would pick up the tab if TC Energy couldn't pay it for some reason. The thing is, though, is that even though Alberta had promised the loan guarantee last March, TC Energy never took advantage of it until just this past January, only 2 months ago. 2 months ago yesterday. It wasn't until 4th of January that TC Energy put in place, and this is to quote them, a US $4.1 billion project-level credit facility to support construction of the Keystone XL pipeline that is fully guaranteed by the government of Alberta. A credit facility is a type of loan that allows a borrower, usually a business, to take out money over an extended period, rather than having to reapply for a loan each time they need money. Kind of like a line of credit, I guess, but different. But along that idea. Anyhow, the 4th of January was only 16 days before Joe Biden was inaugurated as the 46th president of the United States. And during his campaign, before he was even the front runner, he had indicated that if he were elected, one of his first orders of business would be to stop the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. So despite being promised last March that the Alberta government would guarantee financing up to $4.2 billion, TC Energy waited over 9 months to get that financing. 2 months after Biden's election and nearly 1 month after the Electoral College confirmed the election results. They knew full well that Biden had intended on canceling the project in just a matter of days from 4th of January, yet they chose to follow through with the funding anyhow. So 4 days after TC Energy got the financing, they took $497 million of it and repurchased a majority of the government of Alberta's Class A shares, which, like I said, they had planned to do. But given that the company had reclassified $630 million, but repurchased only $497 million, it's unclear how many shares the Alberta government still owns based on the information available in the annual report. Like, how much is left? That's over $100 million. That's over $130 million worth of shares that they reclassified that they didn't sell, or maybe they got revalued at a lower rate. I don't know. That information isn't available in the annual report. And then, as expected and promised, Biden canceled the pipeline permit on 20th of January, so 16 days later. And that same day, TC Energy suspended construction of that pipeline and, quote, while it assesses the implications of the revocation and considers its options along with its partner, the government of Alberta, and other stakeholders. And then they also, to quote, ceased accruing a return on the government of Alberta Class A interests. So because the pipeline was canceled, even though the Alberta government equity was supposed to accrue interest every quarter, they stopped that. There's no more accruing a return because of the cancellation. So basically, where does that leave the credit facility? Well, the suspension of the advancement of the project does not require immediate repayment of the debt, as repayment is dependent upon certain conditions. And while the credit facility, the company continues to be responsible for ongoing interest charges. So they're only paying interest on that credit facility, on the financing they got that the government provided a loan guarantee for. They're not paying anything towards the principal at the moment. They're not required to. And then according to the Alberta government budgets that was released last week, we basically are on the hook for $384 million in equity payment. $892 million in loan guarantee for a total forecasted exposure of $1.3 billion. So we're on the hook for $1.3 billion unless something happens. I mean, if the pipeline gets rebuilt, if people have a change of heart and the pipeline gets rebuilt, or TC Energy just decides to pay the loan back and we don't have to, then we'll get some of that money back. Somebody buys out our shares and maybe we can get that money back. So a few things could happen that allow us to get that $1.3 billion back. But at the moment, we're on the hook for that. And then finally, in the budget, to quote, the government of Alberta is working with TC Energy to explore all options to advance the project and is strongly encouraging the government of Canada to do the same. If KXL does not proceed, and so far it's not, the Alberta government will explore all options to recoup the investment. I'm not sure what those options are, but that's what they're saying. Budget 2021 does not include any provisions for expense which may be incurred in that pursuit. So anything they do to recoup the investment, whatever it costs to pursue those courses, those costs are not in this budget. Those will be costs additional to whatever expenses the government has outlined in their budget. So I don't know what that's going to entail exactly. I don't know if they plan on suing the US government, and so there's going to be legal costs, or I don't know. I have no idea what it is. That's all it says, is that we'll explore all options, and that's certainly one option. So yeah, that's Alberta investment in Keystone XL. Any questions about that? Oh, we had somebody else join us. We went from 2 to 3, back down to 2, and now we're back up to 3 participants. Feel free to introduce yourself and ask any questions you might have. Just finished going over the Keystone XL article I wrote this last week. We also discussed the budget in a previous live stream, so I don't think I'm going to discuss that today unless people have specific questions about it. So I think maybe, unless there are any questions, I'll go on to the article about the Justice Minister announcing a special advisor for police reform. So this was kind of interesting. It just seems like every time the government makes an announcement of advisors or panels or whatever, that there is a lack of trust, that people think there's something fishy going on. And so this was certainly a reaction that people had. The person they've picked as an advisor, his name is, and I hope I get this right, Temitope Oriola. He's an associate professor at the U of A in their sociology department. He researches and teaches in areas of criminology, which includes policing, use of force by police, transnational crime, terrorism, resource conflict, political violence, social movements. So he seems legit. Like, it doesn't seem like I went through his Twitter timeline, and he seems to be critical about, police violence and the over policing of minority populations and that sort of thing. So it doesn't seem like on the surface that he's going to come forward and recommend things that just follow along with what the UCP want. It seems like he could potentially come forward with some really decent suggestions. The only thing is that the UCP are under no obligation whatsoever to follow through on any of those recommendations. And so, yeah, he might come forward with lots of great suggestions, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be implemented. As well, some people were suggesting, this is like the first response some people had to this announcement, is that they're just going to be using this as an opportunity to implement their own provincial police force. I'm not so sure about that, because this is looking at the Police Act. And I don't think the RCMP are governed by the Police Act in Alberta. I haven't looked at it too deeply, but I don't think that's the case. And so I don't think this is going to be specifically about the RCMP. Plus, the Police Act governs all the municipal police forces in Alberta. And so this wouldn't affect just the RCMP. And it potentially would also affect a provincial police force. So I'm not sure that this is going to be ending up that way. I'm not convinced that that is a logical conclusion to draw here from here. Oh, it's just me now. Everybody's left. Oh, sad. I'm all alone. But it will be interesting to see what Oriola does come up with. Even if they don't implement it, I'm quite curious to see what his recommendations are going to be based on some of the things I've seen him write. Like here's some titles of things he's written. So one title was "Why Police Reform Won't Happen Without Public Pressure on Politicians." Another one's "Defunding the Police Requires Understanding What Roles Police Play in Our Society." And another one, "How Police Departments Can Identify and Oust Killer Cops." Hey, no problem, Randy. Glad that you're sticking through it and being here. Appreciate your viewing. So those three topics, they seem fine, on the surface. That this is the type of review that we need in the Police Act. So I'm hopeful, but I'm just not quite certain that it's going to be something that the UCP is going to implement. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. And then, two more articles. So next one I think we'll talk about is the UCP donors. So earlier this week, I think it was this week, maybe it was late last week, someone had brought to my attention that there were several UCP donors that had given more than the maximum allowed in 2020 to the UCP party. So there were 11. So the maximum amount any party can receive from an individual is $4,243 in any given year. Now that is a combined total. So that's okay. I should reword that a little bit. So a person can donate up to $4,243 per year. And that $4,243 is a combined total that they're allowed to donate to parties, constituencies, candidates, nomination contests, leadership contests. They can either donate the entire $4,243 to one of those or a combination of all of them. But it has to be a combined total of no more than $4,243. So potentially parties can receive up to $4,243, but they could potentially receive less than that if the individuals donate to other like constituencies or whatever else, or candidates. Now, so there were 11 people who donated over $4,243 last year to the UCP party directly. And none of these that I could find had donated outside of just the party. They donated to just the party. None of them, from what I could tell, donated to a constituency or anything like that. So interestingly, 3 of them donated in the fourth quarter $4,243. And all 3 of them donated $4,000 in the first quarter. So I thought that was really interesting. It's quite coincidental that they donated the same amount. For a total of $8,243. Now, these 3 also donated a total of $4,000 in 2019 as well. So some people were saying that, well, maybe it's possible that they donated too much in 2020, and so it was being carried over, or in 2019, and so it was being carried over in to 2020. But like 3 of them donated $4,000 in 2019, and then they donated $4,000 in the first quarter of 2020, and then again $4,243 in the fourth quarter. So my guess is what's going to end up happen, at least with these 3, is that they're going to have to, again, to take their fourth quarter donations are going to have to be retooled to $243. and then 4,000 will have to be carried over into the first quarter of 2021, which is what may have happened this last year. The others all donated less than that. So those three donated $8,243, which is almost double the amount. And then the next one was 8,000, and then it kept going down from there. The lowest of the 11 donors was $4,500. So just barely over, a little over $200 more than they should have, almost $250 more. Now, no other party had donations from a single person that ended up being higher than $4,243. The UCP were the only ones. Although there were some parties where spouses both contributed to $4,243. So legally per person, the donations were under the maximum allowed, but as per household, they donated more than maximum allowed, but it's still legal and above the board, technically speaking. But according to a tweet sent out by Elections Alberta last summer, parties have 30 days after filing to correct any over contributions. And so that would put them at 14th of February, which was, last month. The quarterly report that I gathered this information from was dated 21st of January with data effective of 19th of January. So that doesn't have data up to the 14th of February. So it's possible that these over contributions were noticed and that corrections were refiled to Elections Alberta. But until Elections Alberta updates the quarterly reports, then that information isn't going to show up. And so we won't know exactly what happened there. But that would be my anticipation, is that when the quarterly reports come out for the first quarter in 2021, probably next month is my guess, or maybe the beginning of May, we're going to find $4,000 donations for those three, and then possibly other donations from the other individuals, so it can clean up. I mean, the one is going to be only like $250 or whatever. Yeah, and so that's pretty much that story. If they don't do that, if they haven't retooled their donations, their over contributions amounts, then I anticipate that there might end up being some fines issued. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. And then finally, the last story I wanted to discuss was the fact that Alberta is drilling fewer wells even before the pandemic started. So I was doing some research for another story a few weeks ago, and I counted a page on the government's website called Economic Highlights for the week of January 25th, 21. And it contained various economic indicators. And when I clicked on a few of them to get more information, I found data for drilled wells, and it went back till January 2000. So I thought, well, that's a lot of data. And so I thought I'd take a look at it. And what I found was that the number of wells being drilled are down significantly. That both for exploratory wells and development wells. So exploratory wells are wells that they drill to try and decide if it's worth drilling there for oil or gas or whatever, since there are other wells that are listed in this information. And then development wells are the wells that are doing the actual extracting. Okay. Sorry, I was just checking something here. Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, and so we went from exploratory wells went from a high of nearly 600 in March 2006 to not having been above 100 in over a decade. And then extraction wells went from a high of over 1,800 in July 2005 to an average of only 350 new wells per month during the 3 years leading up to the pandemic. And this just wasn't an NDP problem either. Like, the number of new wells has been dropping for roughly a decade before the NDP even took power. So we can't blame the NDP for this drop in well drilling. And although they shot back up during the last half of the NDP's term, they plateaued. They didn't keep going. So I think it was toward the end of 2008 or end of 2017, beginning of 2018, something like that. They started to go up and then just leveled off, and then they didn't go anywhere after that. It passed 500 development wells only 5 times during those last 2 years, and never passed 50 exploratory wells. And then, of course, nothing's changed at the USP. Nothing for the good. No changes for the good, anyhow. None of their pro-oil and gas initiatives and policies that they've implemented has resulted in more wells being drilled. Yeah, so, and then if you just go to the article, you can see I break it down more between bitumen and natural gas and oil and other. I'm not even sure what other is, but anyhow. Under other, we've only drilled 1 or 2 drill wells over the last 5 years for exploratory. Many months with no drilling at all. Yeah, so that is about it. That's pretty much all my stories for the week. So if you have any questions about any of them, feel free to ask in the chat, or if there were any political topics that came up in Alberta politics this past week, post that in the chat if you want to discuss about it. We can talk about it and take my take and see what your take is or whatever. And if not, then that's cool too. Maybe I'll give you a heads up on some of the stories that I have in the works right now. Let's see here. I have a story. I'm not sure if I'm going to let it come out tomorrow or maybe next week, depending on how it goes. Because I'm working on an article right now. My spouse is sick and I've sort of been taking care of him. I'm not sure if that article is going to be ready in time. I was planning on doing that for Tuesday, but I might do this tomorrow's article, move that to Tuesday anyhow. So what I'm going to be talking about, I have 3 articles I'm currently working on. One of them is doing a background on who's involved with the Business Council of Alberta. The Business Council of Alberta recently praised the provincial government's new budget, talked about how it is a balanced approach to the economy and recovery and that sort of thing. So at the request of somebody on Twitter, I'm going through and talking about who is on the board and the executive of the Business Council of Alberta. Another article I'm working on is the real reasons why young people don't vote. And I think this is going to surprise a lot of people. I don't think people are really understand. I think they underestimate young people in voting, and I think they are perpetuating some myths about young people that I think people are going to be surprised by this information. And another one is the approval of a loan from the Alberta government. I think that one's going to be coming out on Monday. So yeah, that's what I have in the works at the moment, and I'm sure there are plenty of other stories that I just haven't had a chance to look at yet. I'm still getting caught up on a bunch of emails that people had sent me while I was in school. Hopefully I can get to those pretty soon. I don't know, Randy. I think the price of oil plays somewhat into the number of wells being drilled. Obviously, if the price of oil isn't as high as it was, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, then that's going to play into it, because who's going to drill for oil if it's not as lucrative as it was when it was at its peak, So yeah, I'm sure that plays a lot into it. But then that really tells you that Alberta really needs to look at how it approaches the oil and gas industry. Like, if people aren't going to be even drilling because the price of oil is not as high as it used to be, then why are we courting to them? Like, the price of oil is something we cannot control. And if there's that much volatility in the market, then it just seems to me like the intentions might be misguided, that we're focusing on something that we have very little control over. And we need to get back to focusing on things we do have a bit more control over. Yeah, and that's a really good point. I don't know how many jobs are lost to automation. The oil and gas industry does employ quite a few people in Alberta. It's not the top employer. Just let me pull up information here. I know I have it in here somewhere. I did an article about this a few months ago. There we go. 10 industries that employ the most Albertans in 2019. Yeah, so the top, they're not in the, no, they are in the top 10. They're in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th place. So they're 7th place. So we, so this entire industry is the forestry, fishing, mining, quarrying, oil, and gas. But the vast majority of those are going to be in oil and gas. I don't think there are a lot of jobs in forestry or fishing, for that matter, in Alberta. So most of these are going to be in oil and gas. But in 2019, that industry employed over 145,000 people. So it's not insignificant. The highest is more than twice that number. And the second highest, which is healthcare and social assistance, is almost twice that number. No, I'd say it's about twice that number as well. So the top two are employ more people than forestry, fishing, mining, quarrying, oil, and gas do. But it's still a significant number of employees. But I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of those layoffs were because of automation, because obviously high oil prices aren't coming back. Like it's been a long time. It's been over a decade since we've had oil prices that high. And in order for these companies to become more financially sustainable, yeah, we're number 7. We're number 7. In order for these companies to become financially sustainable, they're going to have to find ways to cut costs. And that's going to include labor. It always includes labor. Cost cutting always includes cutting labor. But they have to be able to continue to produce. And so the only way they can do that is to automate some of the processes. So I'm sure that some of the job losses were through automation, and not necessarily because of NDP policies, but because, like you said, the price of oil is not as high as it used to be. And in order for them to continue making the same amount of profits, they have to find ways to cut those costs. And so automation makes a lot of sense. It totally does. So I'm sure that is a big part of it. Yeah, I agree. Like the cancellations being blamed on the NDP. I think a lot of things were blamed on the NDP. It's just too bad that the NDP gained power, right as things were starting to come down. Right, that 2014 era is when things really started to slump. And it was the case with drilling for oil. That was the case for oil revenues as well. And so it's just everything started to come down right at the same time, just as they were coming in. And then we hit a recession as well during that time. And so they just got a really bad break. The UCP have to deal with the pandemic, and so they're going to have a really hard time being able to justify getting elected again on their fiscal policies. Here's where the difference is that people assumed the NDP were going to rack up debt, right? And the UCP, or the people assumed the NDP were going to rack up debt. That's just an assumption voters made. They assumed the UCP were not going to rack up debt, or at least not as much. But they've been racking up debt at a faster rate than the NDP have been. And that's before the pandemic as well. But the pandemic certainly hasn't helped. They've made that debt level much, much higher, or it's made the debt level much, much higher. So they're going to have a difficult time rationalizing that to their voters. And I don't envy the UCP having to deal with that, coming in and promising jobs, pipeline, and economy, and not being able to deliver on any of those things. But that's the cards they were dealt with. And so, you can't come back and blame the NDP for fiscal problems that they didn't have a lot of control over, and then not do the same thing to the UCP. You have to do it both ways. The difference with the NDP, though, is they didn't try and reduce revenues. I mean, they kind of did, because they cut the small business corporate tax rate from 3% to 2%. But they increased the the main corporate income tax rate, and then they introduced a progressive personal income tax rate as well. So they try to make up for some of that loss of revenue, but the UCP hasn't, right? Like they made it worse. So not only did they have this pandemic to deal with and low oil prices and everything else, but they made it worse by cutting revenue. So yeah. Yeah, that's true. Cool. Well, I appreciate the question, Randy. I think maybe what I might do is I might take this video over the next few days and split it up and release small segments, try and see, get some feedback on some of these things. So I appreciate you asking this question because that wasn't something that I was talking about. So thanks for chiming in and sticking with me the entire way. I appreciate the perseverance, and hopefully I didn't bore you too much, get you too tired. And I hope to be able to do this more regularly and maybe give people a heads up more in advance so that I can have a lot more people on board. And I think I like this better than Discord because I think it's more accessible for people. They don't have to sign up with a Discord account. And then I can upload it and make it available at a later date after giving preference to my monthly subscribers. So yeah, appreciate it, Randy. Thanks. Take care of yourself. And anybody else watching this, solidarity.